Hello and welcome to the first installment of my Language Isolates of the World series, where I'll be profiling the world's various language isolates and discussing the features that make them stand out as interesting, unique, and perhaps even mysterious. We'll start this series with this video on the Nivkh language of far eastern Siberia and Sakhalin Island. The Nivkh people are semi-sedentary hunter-gatherers, that is, they live in permanently settled villages for most of the time, rather than living a migratory nomadic lifestyle like other hunter-gatherer cultures. Their territory sits on both sides of the Straits of Tartary, separating the Amur River basin of eastern Russia from Sakhalin Island, just north of the Japanese island of Hokkaido. They were originally referred to by the Russian term Gilyak, but their name for themselves is Nivkh, which has been the standard term since the early 20th century. Their language is quite endangered, and it's difficult to count the number of native speakers remaining, as bilingualism in Russian is more or less universal nowadays, but it is likely between only 100 to 1,000 at most. Salmon is a major staple of their diet, and they get around on sleds pulled by dogs. Reindeer herding isn't a significant part of their lifestyle, unlike many of their Siberian neighbors. Their traditional religious beliefs are shamanistic and animistic, based on the veneration of elemental nature spirits, especially fire. One particular ritual of note is the Bear Festival, which involves the capture and sacrifice of a sacred bear to return its soul to the spirit realm. This practice has parallels to the Iomante ritual of the Ainu culture of southern Sakhalin and Hokkaido, with whom they have a great cultural affinity and perhaps even a linguistic affinity in many ways. A Latin-based alphabet was invented in the 1930s and is still used by some Western linguists. The current standard writing system, however, based on a variant of the Cyrillic alphabet, was invented in the 1950s by Soviet linguists as part of a broader effort to standardize the various native languages of the USSR. The Nivkh population, despite its size, is fairly genetically diverse. There is no one predominant Y chromosome or mitochondrial genetic lineage. C2 is the most consistently observed male line, famously the same Y chromosome associated with Chinggis Khan, quite widespread throughout Asia. P is also found, which is common among Turkic and Central Asian males. Interestingly, we also see Y chromosomes K and O, which are not uncommon in Southeast Asia, suggesting an ancient migration from further south. The maternal mitochondrial line is mostly represented by haplogroups Y and G, among a few others, both of which are fairly unique to Northeast Asia, but Y is also found rarely in Southeast Asia, further corroborating that theory. The Udige people, a Tungusic group, are the most closely related according to genetic studies. Similarities to the Koryak, a Chukotka-Kamchatkan group, and various Southeast Asian peoples have also been noted. Some scholars believe the ancestral Nivkh culture may have once settled further to the southwest, in the Songhua River Valley of northeast China. They expanded towards their current territory as they were gradually displaced by the Tungusic migrations, the ancestors of the Manchu and Udige peoples. But regardless of their ancestral origins, the presence of the Nivkh around their current region likely dates back to roughly the end of the last ice age. Also note that Japan was connected to mainland Asia by a land bridge during this time. Archaeological cultures like the Susuya, Ahotsk, and Tobini-Tai may have been Nivkh speakers or closely related. A link has also been proposed to the Emishi, a culture of prehistoric Japan. Having lived in relative isolation for centuries, they eventually came to be tributary vassals of the Chinese dynasties, starting with the Mongol Yuan and later the Ming and Qing, trading fur pelts in exchange for iron tools and weapons. In 1858, Russian Cossacks conquered the island of Sakhalin. The island was split between the Russian and Japanese empires until the Russian conquest of the island was completed during the Second World War. Like many other Siberian cultures, the Nivkh were forced to largely abandon their traditional way of life by Soviet-era collectivization policies. Since then, a wide diaspora of Nivkh immigrants has spread across Russia, Japan, and the rest of the world. Some notes on the Nivkh language and what distinguishes it from its neighbors follow. It has a six-vowel system, which usually means a, e, o, u, and a silly one, which in this case is I. One remarkable feature is the consonant alternation system, in which hard consonants or plosives can be softened to soft consonants or fricatives in certain contexts, usually to facilitate pronunciation of consonant clusters in compound words or affixes. Aspirated plosives like pa correspond to voiceless fricatives like fa, and unaspirated plosives like ba correspond to voiced fricatives like va. The rolled r sound also has a voiceless equivalent, r, so there's a three-way contrast between voiceless, aspirated, and voiced consonants. This three-way system has been compared to Korean, which distinguishes aspirated, unaspirated, and tense. Nivkh grammar is agglutinating, and even has some elements of polysynthesis. Very long compound words can be formed, which express ideas equivalent to a full sentence in English. He or she only took one crab at least, for example, which would be rendered something like, if tavrainyan varku verboj. It has subject-object-verb-word order and about 9 or so declension cases, and no grammatical gender, all standard features among North and Central Asian languages. However, it also lacks the distinctive vowel harmony, and its complex system of numeral classifiers and the variety of aspect suffixes in the verbal system show more affinity for the languages of Northeast Asia, like Japanese and Korean, rather than the so-called Central Altaic type. There is also robust usage of noun incorporation, perhaps more reminiscent of some Native American languages. The personal pronouns distinguish inclusive versus exclusive forms, so there's a different form of we depending on if you mean you and me, including you, or me and other people, excluding you. Possession is marked with pronominal prefixes. Like the Yukagir languages covered in my Language Families of the World series, verb tense is a distinction of future versus non-future, a fairly unique system rather than past versus non-past, which is far more common across the world. There are several aspect distinctions marked as suffixes on the verb, which convey subtle shades of nuanced meaning. Nivkh also makes heavy use of ideophones, or onomatopoetic sounds used in storytelling, not unlike Japanese. By its nature, as a language isolate, Nivkh is quite distinct from all other known languages. However, can we speculate hypothetically about how it might fit into the family tree of human language? Some scholars believe ancient place names on the Korean peninsula suggest both Nivkh and Japonic languages may have been spoken there in the distant past, and they may have even influenced early Korean. Nivkh is classified in the Paleo-Siberian language group, like Yeniseian, Chukotka-Kamchatkan, Yukagir, and Esquelut. Among the Paleo-Siberian languages, it seems to have the most affinity with Chukotka-Kamchatkan. Given the connection between the ancient Paleo-Siberians and the Native Americans, some links have been proposed to the Americas as well, like the Mosin group of the Pacific Northwest, which includes Chimakwan, Salishan, and Wakashan, and perhaps even Algic more distantly. One current theory is that there were several waves of migration across the Bering Land Bridge, at least 4 or 5 separate instances. The Na-Dene family, which includes Navajo, Apache, and the Athabascan languages, is associated with one of the later migrations, perhaps the penultimate wave before the final spread of the Esquelut into North America. This would explain why they seem less divergent across a wider geographic area than other families of North America. Famously, a hypothesis linking Na-Dene to the Yeniseian languages of Siberia has gained some notoriety and even some limited endorsement among linguists. If true, this would imply the Dene-Yeniseians represented the later wave of migration to North America, while the earlier migration associated with Mosin and Algic perhaps originated among the Nivkh and their forebears. But remember, at the end of the day, this is all just speculative. This concludes the first of hopefully many installments in this series on the language isolates of the world. I hope you found this information interesting, if not useful. If so, I would appreciate a like and subscribe for more rare language videos. Thanks for listening.